Hello, welcome to the Black Comix Universe, streaming exclusively here on the Experience. If you're like me, if you are into Black comics, you have noticed that there are more Black comics in the market than ever before, and the only way to keep up with that is to like, subscribe, and share the Black Comix Universe videos that are found on the Experience. Please like and follow the Experience at the_exp on all your social media platforms. That's Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube and Twitch. Also, please subscribe to our email newsletter at blackcomicsuniverse.com, where you can get up to date tips on Black comic book collecting. You can find interesting historical tips and any number of different things about Black Comix Universe through our email newsletter. So please subscribe. Tonight, I'm just going to be introducing some of the Black comic keys that I talk about on my website, blackcomicsuniverse.com. And also, I read a really good article recently in Alter Ego magazine that I like to discuss. That was pretty interesting. And I'd like to share with you a few books that I picked up where I saw in Previews magazine that are coming up. Books that I have on my pull list already, like New Masters that you see over my shoulder here. And there's some other interesting books that are coming your way that I want to get you hip to. So anyway, I'd like to jump right into it. It's been a couple of weeks. This is my first live in a few weeks. I've been super, super busy. I'm actually here in Toledo, Ohio. We just put out our Best of Toledo magazine from the Toledo City paper. So I'm the production manager there. So I've been really, really busy. And you probably don't know this, but did you know that the Experience is broadcast out of Toledo, Ohio? Does anybody know that, Kyle? I don't think so. I might have.
All I know is I didn't win best of anything.
I was wondering. I don't know if
didn't get nominated for anything.
So. I don't know if Toledo even knows about the Experience. We got to fix that, man.
I won Best Comic Shop one year.
Right.
And I went to the party and I sat in the corner by myself.
You didn't even, I don't know.
Well, because the party was the same weekend as Toledo Comic-Con.
Yeah.
So none of my staff could go. They had to work the convention. So I sat in the corner by myself. And then the band came out, and it was a bunch of people I knew. So I wound up playing with the band instead of accepting the award.
You play in a band? What do you play?
No, those were the only people at the party I knew. So I just kind of sat in the background and tambourined every once in a while.
Oh, you were I'm like, wait a minute, Kyle doesn't play an instrument. What?
I do play several instruments, but none that were featured in that band.
What do you play? What are you talking about?
Piano, harmonica, drums, guitar. But
there was no guitar. You could have
no, because it was a R&B band. They had their own players. But I knew some of the people in it, and so like, yeah, you can hang out with us because I didn't know anybody else at the party.
You're supposed to carry a harmonica with you, man, if you play the harmonica.
The harmonica is not prominently featured in Motown music.
Yes, it is. Stevie Wonder. Duh.
Stevie's the only one.
I'm just saying. There's plenty of Stevie Wonder songs that have a harmonica. You could have.
No, it was. The Best of Toledo is always a big deal and always a lot of fun. And we should get nominated for the best locally originating YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, and Twitch streaming platform.
We gotta fix that, man. We gotta
Don't you have any sway there in that paper?
I have a little. So yeah, we should be able to swing something. But yeah, that's been my last few weeks. And then also I want to give a shout out to my son who's he's already married. Jaleel, my oldest, not Malcolm. I was panicking. No, my oldest son, Jaleel. He's already married, but he's having his walima or his reception at the end of this month. So I got a lot of stuff going on here in Toledo, Ohio, home of the Experience. I'm making sure that Toledo knows about that.
Several homes, but yes.
I mean, I'm just saying, technically,
true.
I mean, if we were a TV station, we would be broadcast out of Toledo. But since it's the internet, we technically are all over the place. But
there's more staff members in Toledo than there are anywhere else.
The way I figure it, Kyle is in Toledo, so that means the experience is in Toledo. If Kyle wasn't in Toledo, if Kyle wasn't here, there wouldn't be experience. So there, boom.
I'll take credit for that.
There you go. All right. So without any further ado, I'm going to talk about some comics. I want to start off with one of the keys. If you go to my website, Black Comix Universe, you'll see at the very top there, I have what I call Black Comic Keys. That there's the comics that have historical significance, and some actually have some very significant value in terms of comic book collecting. But what I've been trying to research lately has been Black women in comics, and what I have found is that finding Black women in comics until recently, if you look back, even if you go back as far as the Bronze Age, when we're talking about the 70s and 80s, early 80s, there are not a lot of, it's very hard to find Black women in the mainstream Black comics industry. And this particular book, Golden Legacy, features one of the writers. It's a Black woman by the name of Joan Backus, who may be considered one of the first Black women in the traditional comic book industry. The next name that I find in comics and on a broader scale is, of course, Orms from the 30s, right? But what tends to happen is that there are these long stretches of time before I come across a Black woman in comics, until I get to, say, 1999 and the early aughts. That's when you see a few more names. But even if, for instance, in DC, just to give you some context. So this is 1966 that she wrote in this particular comic, right? And it's also rumored that she was somewhat involved in all Negro comics, but that has not been confirmed. But even that goes into, so we're still going, even so this particular woman, it has been involved in even earlier, right? So, but this particular book we're talking about 1966. The next name that I find as far as a Black woman in comics is Elita Martinez in 1999, who worked for Marvel. So just think about how huge of a gap that is before you start to really find Black women in comics. And so if you can help me, if any of my friends out there can help me fill some of these gaps, I would love to hear from you guys. I'm probably going to hear, of course, I'll hear from my friend Marcus Roberts and my people at Black Comic Lords. They'll probably help me out. But if anybody else is out there that might know of some names that I could add to this list, I'd love to hear them. But yeah, even as when you look at even 2009, right? The first Black woman to work for Marvel or work for DC was in 2009, right? That is a huge amount of time. 2009 with Angela Robertson and Felicia Henderson, who wrote for The Web and Teen Titans. Teen Titans, Felicia Henderson had a fairly long run in the Teen Titans series. So I know that these Black women are out there. And what you find, especially in the early aughts, what you will find is that a lot of Black women creators are starting to create comics in the small press and web comics. So that part of the industry. So when you get to the early aughts, that's when you see names like or publishers like Iron Circus, and where you find that a lot of Black women actually finding success in the small press and producing graphic novels and things like that. But still, we're talking about, I'm finding one or two names every decade or so, which is really bizarre when I start really delving into this, trying to find names of Black women in comics. So if anybody can help me out in that regard, I'd love to hear from you guys. And I'd like to share with you another um, black key that I have been focusing on my website, Black Comix Universe, and it's fantastic for number 119. Now, what's interesting about this particular book is that this book is where the Black Panther changes his name for just this one issue from Black Panther to the Black Leopard. Okay. And he does this to disassociate himself from the Black Panther Party, who was gaining notoriety in the 70s, right? And so what happens is there's this scene where he is going to attack, these people that are keeping him in prison. He's attacking them, and he says, feel the rage of the Black Leopard or something crazy like that, and and it would have been easy enough just to change the name. This is very early in the Black Panther, mythos or creation of the Black Panther. They could have probably changed his name and no one thought anything of it. But they felt the need to have basically T'Challa make a statement about the name change. So it wasn't just changing the name. No, they made it so that it was a real concern of T'Challa, supposedly, right? And he gives the following quote. He basically says, I neither condemn nor condone those who have taken up the name, but T'Challa is a law unto himself. Now, what does that mean? It's like a whole bunch of King's English there. And basically what he's saying is that, well, he's saying two things. One, he remains neutral when it comes to things that are so supposedly controversial to him, supposedly as a character, but in reality that are controversial to Marvel, right? So as much as we want to believe that T'Challa is speaking on his own volition, he's really speaking on behalf of Marvel Comics when he says this. So he says he doesn't neither condemns or condones when he's speaking to the Black Panther Party, right? Those who have taken up the name, right? But by doing so, by not condemning them or condoning them, he is taking a stance where he doesn't condemn or condone any other Black cause, for that matter. And so you see he's not involved in any other civil rights movements, possibly with the exception of battling the KKK, right? So what ends up happening is this statement creates a precedence where the Black Panther or Black comic book characters don't really support or align themselves with any type of political movement to a degree, with the exception of if you happen to if the character comes across a blatantly racist character or villain that they can punch in the face, then they'll do that much, right? So then you'll have, for instance, he doesn't condemn or condone the Black Panther Party, but he does condemn Idi Amin in Africa, right? When you have Marvel 201 with the Thing, where he's fighting a African dictator, a real life African dictator in Marvel Comics. So he steers clear of American politics, but he's all for sticking his hand in real life African politics, right? So what I find interesting is that I have likened, if you read my article on blackcomicsuniverse.com, there's a lot of product placement this episode. But if you read my article on blackcomicsuniverse.com, you'll see that I talk about the fact that this quote is sort of like a prime directive. Like if you're familiar with, for my Trekkies out there, for Star Trek fans, the prime directive is this rule that Starfleet officers have, where they cannot involve themselves in the culture of other planets, right? They cannot support them or stand in the way of any type of cultural development that might aid or hinder their cultural growth or development, technologically or culturally or anything of that nature, right? So they can't get involved. Well, in this sense, the Black Panther is basically Starfleet. He is the most powerful. He's always considered the most powerful, most intelligent character in the not just in Black Comics, but in the Marvel Universe. Period. Right? He's. They always say he's the wealthiest. He has all the most resources. He belongs to the most technologically advanced country on the planet Earth in the 616, and yet he cannot aid or support um, any political movement here in the United States, right? As far as political movements, supposedly political movements, right? But what I find interesting about that is that he makes this statement in the comics, and I can just imagine Googler, the writer on the Black Panther movie, reading this book, this particular issue, and basically the script for Black Panther, the movie practically wrote itself, because this idea that's presented in this comic book is basically the cornerstone of the movie. This is basically what sparks Killmonger's rage and things like that. The fact that Wakanda and the Black Panther have never aided, Black communities in, across the world, right? That they've remained neutral by, like this statement suggests, that they do not condemn or condone these things, and by doing so, they have left, Black communities across the planet in the lurch. And it's very interesting that I'm not sure if this conversation has ever been broached in the comics, but the fact that it's such a central storyline in the movie, I find it very, very fascinating, right? And I think even to today, the Black Panther book that is out right now, I feel, in my opinion, that it's sort of like hindered by the fact that it can't explore broader, cultural topics when it comes to Black folks. They just want the action and things like that, which is great. But as I'll show you tonight, that there are some storylines, there's some comics like New Masters that are exploring these topics, and they're doing it in exciting and interesting ways. It's not that they have to be bogged down with politics and things of that nature. They're just doing things that are so fascinating, or like my friend Tim Fielder in Infinitum, which I mentioned before. They're exploring some things that are not just fun to read, but also empowering to the Black community. And like I said before, when I was talking to Tim, if the things that you were looking for, that you wish that a character like the Black Panther would do in his comic book, I promise you, creators like Tim Fielder are doing it in Infinitum. Shobo and Schaff are doing them in New Masters. Pick up these books. You will not be disappointed by what they're creating. All right, which brings me to now. I have to admit that this book came on my radar after reading this article in Alter Ego magazine, which is very good. It's a very good article. It also has an interview in there with a very prominent Black comic book scholar. That was very interesting as well. So it's two very interesting articles. I've basically been hunting several books from this article, which has been very interesting. So there's been some keys that I picked up from this book. There's been topics that I've been exploring that I got out of this article. Now, my real Black comic book heads that are serious collectors, they read this article and it was just like, they knew everything that's in this article. So it's like, so if you are a intermediate to a professional to a degree, Black comic book collector, you're probably not going to get, there's nothing new in this article, to be fair. But if you are new to Black comics and Black comic book collecting, this is actually a great place to start. It gives a very good timeline as to when Black comic book characters are introduced in the major Black comic book industry, But one of the things that a lot of Black collectors and historians have an issue with this article is that they don't really focus on a lot of the independent publishers like Fitzgerald Publishing that I mentioned at the top of the show from the publisher of Golden Legacy. They don't mention those publishers. It's in a later article, but in this particular article, they don't mention those. They focus on, in this article, they focus on the major publishers like Marvel and DC and things like that. I think they mentioned Charlton Publishing also as well. And it's a very good article, very very enlightening in a lot of ways. But it does this thing where it basically paints these publishers as the hero in this in terms of this, as far as presenting Black superheroes and these characters to that degree, and it really kind of not so much diminishes, but it doesn't really highlight the Black folks that were involved. So, for instance, it sheds gives a ton of credit to a lot of the white creators that created these characters, which is great. I'm not trying to take anything from those folks, but at the same time, it barely mentions creators like Trevor Von Eden or Billy Graham, for instance, the illustrator on Black Panther and on Hero for Hire and things like that. So as much as but like I said, they are painting themselves to be the hero in this vein, where they're the ones who created the quote unquote first Black superheroes, or they're the ones who published the first Black characters and things like that. But at the same time, what this show is even about is that, as along with these these publishers presenting their Black characters, there were actually a lot of Black independent publishers that were actually presenting their own as well. And like I said in the previous episodes, when we talk about, for instance, Luke Cage, well, just a year prior to Luke Cage, there was a character called Black Man that was published independently. So it's not. So there were a lot of creators presenting Black characters, not just Marvel or DC or these larger names. A lot of Black publishers were actually responding to the lack of diversity in comics in their own way. And also what's very interesting is that whereas a lot of Black publishers might not have had access to the comic book industry, what I find very interesting is that there are some very interesting stories in comics that were actually presented in Black newspapers. So Black publishers on a broader scale weren't just publishing comics like Fitzgerald Publishing, but also you had the Black newspapers were also publishing strips. Now, they might not be considered to be comics, but those stories were presented as a counter to what you might find in the comic book industry. So it's very, actually, as a Black comic book collector, it's very important that I pay attention to what's going on in Black newspapers, just as much as I pay attention to what was going on in comic books, right? So this is a very good article. I suggest that you guys pick that up. I think there's been a lot of buzz around this book. The store I pick it up from, he was very excited about the article, and there's been, a lot of people have been, picking it up and reading it. So if you get your hands on a copy, check it out. It's a really good article. And I've never read this magazine before. I think it's kind of interesting that I'm not hip to it. And it's kind of funny because, after Wizard, I didn't realize that, they were still publishing comic book magazines. So this is actually was a pretty good read, even though I kind of judged it as a production manager at a magazine. I wasn't too happy with the layout, but that's neither here nor there. That's not fair. I'm a professional in that regard. So moving along. So check it out. So these are some of the books that I have been seeing in Previews magazine. I picked up the latest copy of Previews. Well, this is in Previews. of Previews Magazine, the latest copy. I found this very helpful between Previews Magazine, DC Connects, all that free stuff that they give. And Previews is really cheap, like only a couple bucks. But all that stuff that they give out at comic book shops, I never realized how important they were. But well, they ain't me. But yeah, I was kind of judgy. Um, but but what was interesting, so now as I pick those up, and it helps me to stay in front of just this wave of Black comics. I'm telling you, like I said at the top of the show, when I tell you that there's more Black comics in the market right now than I've ever seen, and so there's a huge opportunity to really get on the ground floor on what might be collectors items in the near future. But I definitely suggest that you pick those up and check it out. So like the next season or the next book that's supposed to be presented by Milestone Comics from DC, Blood Syndicate, and I'm very interested to see the approach that they take with this particular book. If you remember back in the day, this was basically a gang. It's basically what if the X-Men was actually a street gang like the Bloods or Crips, and like all the members were, had superpowers and stuff like that. So I'm interested to see, how they approach this in a new era as far as, gang culture and stuff like that. They did some very interesting things and broke ground on a lot of stuff in the original series, and I'm interested to see how far they go. But what I find always interesting is if you're going to use gang culture as the backdrop to your story, it's almost you should either you can't go halfway with it. Either you're going to do it or you're not. And if you're too squeamish to really tell a really hardcore, story in that vein, then it's gonna come off a little like milk toast. But I'm interested to see how they go with this. I'm excited the fact that Chris Cross is the artist on it, because he's one of the original Milestone artists that I was, that I always loved back in the day, and I'm actually anxious to see what he does with this book. What people might not realize is that he was the one, he did all the breakdowns for Static, so in the Static series. So although there was another artist that did the work, all the layouts was Chris Cross. And so, and even he drew a few panels, a few pages in the actual book. And I actually think that his work was some of the best work that was ever in the series. So I'm very anxious to see what he does with this title, Blood Syndicate, and that's, I think, May, I believe. Yeah, at least it was in the May issue of DC Connect, so I'm assuming it's coming out in May. Let's see here what I got next. Well, I'm gonna save this for last. Rivers of London. All right, so check it out. So I'm not sure how many people are hip to this series, this comic book series. Ben Aronovich is actually a science fantasy writer, right? That he writes novels, fantasy novels, right? And the series is called Rivers of London. There's about 6 or 7 or so titles under this Rivers of London series. And the best way to describe Rivers of London is it's basically Harry Potter meets Men in Black. Okay. So the main character is a rookie cop who becomes a member of basically a whatever. Kyle's trying to school me on Rivers of London. No, you can't school me on Rivers of London. Anyway, feel free to jump in though. But yeah, Rivers of London is basically Harry Potter meets Men in Black. So it's a rookie cop who joins basically a elite police force that deals with the occult or magic and stuff like that. Um, and there are these, when they talk about the rivers of London, the reality is that the rivers that flow into London, right? Each of those rivers or tributaries or whatever, any type of body of moving water, however you want to call it, they all have a god or lower god or something to that effect tied to it. So the Thames has a god or an Orisha that they refer to it as Orisha even. And some of those guys are white, some of those guys are black, they have all these interesting cultural ties. And some of the stories have been really, really, the books is dope. And they continue those stories in the comics in the Rivers of London series. What you got, Kyle?
Well, this is one of those series that, like, when I first owned my store, the publisher sent like previews of this book to us when the first volume was coming out.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, this is great. And I ordered it and I couldn't sell it to save my life.
I don't know why people aren't into it.
And then,
you know what it is? It needs a TV show because it has all the elements. I promise you, the book especially has all the elements for a Netflix or even a BBC show. So I'm surprised it doesn't have a show. It's not on TV.
Well, what I was going to say is it's one of those things that, like, I kept carrying it though. Like, I would just order a couple of copies, like one for myself and a couple for the shelf. And, it was no big deal. Because what would happen is I'd get a whole set together, like a whole series together, and then I could sell it to somebody who was looking for, a whole series, but not something that was traditional or whatever.
Right.
And then since then, I've watched it continuously grow in popularity to the point where now, like, this series that you're talking about right now, the Deadly Ever After, is getting the most hype of any series they've ever done.
Right.
Because, like, I think it's one of those, it took it a minute to find its voice.
Yeah.
At least figure out what it was. Sure. Yeah, figure out what it was.
Mm-hmm.
And then now that it's done that, it's taken off. And it's just, it's the hipster in me is going, I was in it before it was cool. But at the same time, the fan of things in me is like, oh my God, I can't wait for so many people to go back and read all of these awesome books that existed before this.
Right. And then what's so crazy is they're definitely building. I can't imagine them not doing a television show as much as they've invested in not just the books, but in comics as well. It's like, it's practically a franchise.
I think it'll be like Sherlock was, the BBC Sherlock with Benedict Cumberbatch.
And that was Cumberbatch. Yeah, Cumberbatch. No, it was good. That was a good series too. That was a good series too. Right. And that's what I'm saying. Like, I'm surprised it's not on BBC. Like
four short movies as opposed to an ongoing series or something.
Because the book is really good. The books are really good, and it's basically built for television. So I'm like,
there's another one that goes with this, and I can't remember the title of it. And Dan Wickline could tell us off the top of his head, I'm sure. But
I was just looking at it. Hold on, it's another one with this series. No, this is Deadly Ever After.
Ben Aronovich has another book that's kind of like a, if this is Harry Potter meets Men in Black.
Men in Black.
That one is like the Twilight Zone meets Sherlock Holmes. Like, it's a similar story that he's told that I think they've only ever done graphic novels for, as opposed to individual floppies. But it's really good too, and I wouldn't be shocked if you don't see it developed soon.
I'm just surprised that even like not even a piece of press about in development or something.
Well, now Amazon just bought BritBox, right? Which is a streaming service that's just BBC and English shows.
Okay. So
it wouldn't shock me if you don't see it get developed for BritBox and then come to like Prime Video.
Something. I'm just surprised. It's like what it needs is this some type of show, and it would definitely take off. But I'm very interested in the fact that he's been around of it, has invested so much in comics. After the books, like he's basically carried on the story that you find in the novels, in the comics. And so like these series, like this Deadly Ever After, this is only in comics. This is not a series that you will find in the novel, so to speak, which is great. So it's like he has hundreds of stories to tell, in terms of, you know, uh, this actually being some type of, television, franchise. That's why I keep saying franchise, because there's so much content that he has created around this, in this quote unquote universe, that I am amazed that it hasn't come to TV yet, or some type of streaming service. Which means as a collector, there's a ton of opportunity to get in now, because nothing has ever been announced. Nothing has been announced. Nothing has been, maybe someone owns the rights, so you could probably look it up and find that out. But I haven't heard anything in terms of this actually being a show or anything like that. But this might be the time to invest in these books and these now, before anything pops off, because these are actually really good. So that's something I would definitely keep an eye on. Rivers of London, right? And let's see.
It doesn't, there is a story from, what year was this? This is 2019.
Mm-hmm.
Simon Pegg and Nick Frost stolen pictures to adapt Ben Aronovich's fantasy drama Rivers of London. That is the last article about anything happening.
Mm-hmm.
And this is April 2019, so this is like pre-COVID. So who knows what's happened to it? Like, there's not been an update or anything like that I can see. There is a Rivers of London RPG coming out. A tabletop RPG, but other than that, there's nothing about it turning into a show. But it was with Simon Pegg and Nick Frost, who you know from Shaun of the Dead, and some of those movies.
And that would be perfect, because that humor is definitely in the book. So if they could tie that into some type of, it has everything it needs for a successful television run, because there's such a huge cult following around this, between the books and the comics, and like you said, the RPG. So I'm very, bullish on Rivers of London.
Mm-hmm.
So get in on it now before, and that's another thing, just like Kyle was saying, very small orders, very small print runs, so it could be very rare.
Is this published by Titan?
I don't know. Let me see. Yep.
So just so people are aware, Titan Books, they are actually an English company publishing books for the United States. So they're the ones, they do Doctor Who now. Mm-hmm. They do a lot of these kind of, it's all licensed properties. Everything they do is a licensed property, but they print incredibly tight. So most books are between a 2,500 book print run and a 4,000 book print run. Like the Doctor Who ones are obviously higher, and then it goes down from there. So it's one of those kind of things just to be watching and to be cognizant of when you go to look for these books, that if stores don't have them, getting back issues will be tough. So get what you can get when you can get it.
Yeah. Yep. Yes, sir. And then, of course, as always, put this on your pull list. I use the Previews app. I'm dropping their name because I would like for them to be a sponsor. So I don't know. So yeah, I use Previews. I pick up the book. I use the Previews website, and I communicate with my LCS to tell them what books I like added to my pull list. So it's a very, very convenient service that I tend to use frequently. All right, check it out. New Masters. This is already out. I think a new issue comes out tomorrow, actually. Like I said, this particular book has everything that you would want to come out of the Black Panther. And let me explain to you why I'm pitting these two books against each other. This is basically a Black comic versus right here. I'm pitting New Masters against the Black Panther, and I'm telling you right now, I think New Masters is better, and I'm gonna explain why. Right? Um, for as much flack, um, uh, 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 the last creator on the Black Panther got for his run on the Black Panther, Ta-Nehisi Coates, um, he did something very important for the character by making him Emperor of the Intergalactic Empire of Wakanda. I got that wrong. Anyway, by making his broadening his universe, so to speak, right? Making it intergalactic, putting blackness on an intergalactic scale. He basically gave, a layup to the next creator. Take that and run with it. It's like I can't imagine being given a much any larger of a playground than that, right? And for all sorts of purposes, in this newest series, it's as if he hasn't accomplished anything. Like I can't imagine going through what T'Challa went through and becoming the emperor of the intergalactic empire of Wakanda. And then in the pages of this new series, someone's cussing him out, saying, "F you, T'Challa. I ain't doing what you say." Like, really? That's where we're going? It's so crazy how far away that he's gotten from what Coach has done. And for his credit, he's probably told to distance himself from the Coach run because, frankly, most diehard Black Panther fans didn't like the Coach run. So I understand that approach, but by doing so, I think the timing couldn't have been worse because what Coach was plugging into was this idea of Afrofuturism, and I think he was trying to, create an environment conducive to that type of storytelling. But in light of basically, people not being all that happy with Coach run, you get Ridley to come in and he goes left, right? Or right, or whatever the case might be. He basically distanced himself from that storyline. But I think it's sad because while he isn't really creating a real Afrofuturistic storyline, creators like Shobo and Schaff in New Masters are definitely creating that. And in this world, and I think what's interesting about New Masters is that they're kind of bearing the lead here. If you're not reading this book, the premise is, and this is amazing to me, this idea that this is the planet Earth in the distant future that has been, so it's kind of a dystopian story that the planet Earth has been invaded by an alien or alien force, and basically has destroyed all the traditional Western centers of power, right? So your New York's, your Europe's, or England, your all these major countries or seats of power on the planet Earth have been destroyed by this invasion, right? And what's left is the African continent and parts of Asia are now the center, or the center of this, the seat of power is in these places. So which suggests that now it's an amalgam of African cultures and alien cultures now basically run this planet Earth, right? That's an amazing feat in and of itself. The fact that this story starts there, right? And it's something that could have possibly happened. Not the fact that, Black Panther would have came back and basically take over the planet Earth. But what if the Black Panther actually had came back? Now he's empowered intergalactically. He's not confined to this tiny country in Wakanda anymore. He's an intergalactic um, leader, right? What if he came back and imposed certain things on an American culture and all this kind of stuff? What if he, funded the Black Lives Matter movement and did any number of different things? Like the possibilities would be endless. But like I've stated before in the beginning, at the top of the show, he's hindered, right? The directive that he's under, that he imposed, even supposedly imposed upon himself, he can't involve himself in Black political things of that nature, right? He can't explore these type of storylines. Even in Icon, Reggie Hudlin is exploring the storyline where Icon basically eradicates the drug trade in Dakota, right? That's a major, like, it has its faults in the plan, and the things have things that they didn't quite expect happen in response to that, but they attempted it, and I appreciate the attempt in that storyline. And so I've been following that very, very closely. But when you have somebody as powerful as Black Panther, you would just imagine that, there's possibilities are endless. He could do so much more. And the fact that he doesn't, or is hindered from doing that, I find very very disappointing, because there's a huge opportunity there to really take not just the Black Panther, but Black folks in general, and just basically also empower other Black comic book characters to be able to do more in their storylines. But mark my words, just because it's not happening in the Black Panther storyline now, that doesn't mean it's not going to happen in the near future. And I'm fairly certain that the idea of Afrofuturism is going to take hold in the mainstream very soon. Like I've noticed, like, for instance, they haven't necessarily marketed comics like the Black Panther as Afrofuturistic stories or things like that. But I wouldn't be surprised that in the near future that they will be. And I think that writers like Shobo and artists like Shobo and Shaf, as far as a creative team, they're brothers, and Shaf on the artwork on this book is, fantastic. I wouldn't be surprised if they find their way into the, in the major big two, presenting a real, bona fide Afrofuturistic storyline. Creators from the African continent, for that matter, too, as well. We already have Juni Ba, the writer on Monkey Meat for Image Comics. This is another Image book as well, but he's already written a short story in the last issue of Black Panther. So I wouldn't be surprised that you will see more, creators like this finding their way into Marvel. But I hope and pray that they're able to really broaden basically what the Black Panther is capable of, and not be so, skittish or afraid to really, for him to really have an impact in a real significant way, right? Just like he did in the Black Panther movie. And I'm interested to see how far they take that idea. Like, you'll notice, like, at the end of the Black Panther movie, he, has these outreach centers in Oakland, California, that he plans to create. I like to see the impact of that. What comes out of a place like that? Do we have other characters or superhero characters that come out of a cultural exchange of that nature? Like, what comes of that? So I think there's an opportunity to really, broaden not just, our imaginations in that way. And I, look forward to, that happening in Black Panther. But I'm really excited about what's been going on in the main, with these independent, creators like that are happening at Image. Next week, I'm probably going to share a lot of Kickstarters, like a lot of stuff that's happening in the indie community in terms of what's going on in that world. So, like I said, there hasn't been this many Black comics in the marketplace right now, and you have to subscribe to Black Comix Universe to know, to stay ahead of these things and to know what's hot. And like everybody around here says, listen to Imani, and yes, you should listen to Imani. Yeah, check me out. Subscribe to the Black Comix Universe email list, please, please, please. Join and follow, subscribe, and share all the EXP videos. Check them out on all digital platforms. That's Twitter, Twitch, Facebook, and YouTube. And yeah, what else you got, Kyle? Shout out to Toledo, Ohio. Toledo in the house. You got anything else, Kyle? Kyle probably walked away from the microphone.
What?
You got anything else, Kyle?
No, I got nothing.
You got nothing? What you reading? Nothing. What you reading, lady?
Dan and I read a bunch of books for our show today. I'm having trouble remembering what they are now.
Did you read Monkey Meat?
Not this. No.
Did you read? Oh yeah, I forgot to mention John Carter.
Yeah. Well, you should mention John Carter.
I forgot to mention John Carter. John Carter of Mars, written by Chuck Brown. The artwork by George Cambadias. That's the artist on Buckhead, by the way. Showbo's other book. So I'm actually interested in that because I like George's artwork. So that's by Chuck Brown, the writer that's on the writer of Excellence, but it's also writing. Is Chuck Brown writing? He's not writing Black Manta, is he? I think so. But yeah, it's like I said, there's a ton of content, and the only way to know for sure is to subscribe. And I will do my best to keep you guys informed. So thank you and good night.